1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I know a university student from UANP, he's a friend of mine, who actually took Ozempic because his mom told him to, even though he wasn't obese, he was just a bit on the chubby side. And the important nuance is that he wasn't a diabetic. What happened was that he asked his aunt, who was a doctor, to fake a prescription so he could take it for cosmetic purposes. He then took it, and immediately he got the side effect of literally not being able to take a shit. Like, he said he took a shit like twice a week, and that kind of was problematic because it led to severe constipation coupled with bouts of dehydration that eventually led to ulcers and stuff. But he did say the upside was he lost weight. He lost like 30 pounds in less than a month, which was rather unhealthy because he was working out and trying to do all of those things in the beginning. So I asked him, why do you do it? And he said, I actually regret doing it because I feel really bad and I'm worried about what my doctor said. And my doctor said a possible harm and side effect of this is that you potentially can wreck some pancreatic nuances in order to prevent your ability in the future to regulate insulin precisely at the point in which you may become a diabetic. So it's sort of this very deadly wager that ultimately happens. And we think that more than side effects, which I think opening largely talked about, the biggest problem about this is that it really creates an unhealthy and perverse incentive structure wherein your disposition towards being healthy is largely wrecked. It equates number going down on the scale with health up and you potentially being healthy. And my friend also did mention that, now that I lost weight, I can start eating all the food I like. And that in and of itself presents a harm because it lulls these particular people into a false sense of success and security, wherein the perspective of health, which is supposed to be like physiological, mental, emotional, very well-rounded Maslow's hierarchy stuff, it literally becomes solely on the basis of your weight, and that particular becomes problematic because there are a lot of people who are like batak, they're jacked or they're thin, but they potentially have a really crap diet, and as a consequence, they become more predisposed to the top killers. Things like heart disease, things like stroke, and some forms of cancer, which are more prevalent, especially if you eat a lot of the bad stuff that opening opposition did characterize to be quite readily accessible. The path to victory of closing government is simple. Number 1, we're going to talk about why is this rise particularly important and what exactly is the harm on these particular individuals who take these particular things. We have to ask the question, who takes these things to begin with? Like, of course, aside from diabetics, I'll talk about them later because they're particularly an important stakeholder. But these particular people who take it aren't diabetic. And that's something that opening opposition didn't really contend with because the motion wasn't this House supports the rise of Ozempic and all these other examples, but particularly about the lens in which these particular people look at what it's used for. They're not diabetic. These particular people take it. And as a consequence, these particular people who oftentimes are very rich and can otherwise afford being able to do all of those things and then even more, is exactly at the point in which it particularly becomes harmful. The second thing is, I want to elevate this compared to top half because I agree largely with what our opening said, but we think we also have to nuance this to the most important stakeholder. People who this medicine was actually created for, the counterfactual and comparative are freaking diabetics who otherwise would not have access to this because rich people who aren't even fat, who aren't diabetic, who don't need it, particularly get absolutely wrecked. How come? They get wrecked because the people who do not need it but take it lead to the price of that becoming higher, especially since they tend to be from EPL countries like the West, Europe, all of those people. Hence why the landed cost of that when it goes here is what? 9 grand per injection? Bro, okay lang. Once a month lang. Like, literally do the math, right? The math of having to take that versus eating relatively healthy or getting a gym subscription or do fucking push-ups or calisthenics at home is particularly harmful. So, if opening opposition's main case line is that it's particularly difficult to do these things, I think that's kind of the point, no? Because if it was so easy to lose weight and be healthy, then we'd all have a six-pack and be perfectly fine. But the fact that you need to be able to work for your health so that 50 years down the line, we don't get predisposed to a lot of these particular diseases makes it worth it. So, the additional harm to these people are that the very important stakeholder who need this medication, who it was created for, otherwise don't particularly get access for it. What are the structural reasons for why prices go higher, which is a direct response to flip a lot of the material we get from opening opposition? The first is very simple: supply and demand. Where are a lot of these medicines being used and created? Probably in America, right? But when you're trying to send that to the global south or in our side of the world, it particularly becomes more expensive at the point in which all of these like rich dudes who aren't even diabetic or fat use it so that they can, I don't know, feel better about themselves and use it as an excuse to like not do what they're supposed to do. Number two, it particularly provides the competition a chance to be able to benchmark with the first player. Meaning, it's precisely because they want margins that actually lead them to pricing higher, wherein we reject their premise of it being lower because you have competition. It becomes oligopolistic in nature, wherein prices of this just skyrocket and go higher. The third is that you ultimately have a very limited supply in developing nations, and particular people who otherwise cannot afford other forms of diabetic treatment in order to regulate their insulin, like being able to have an insulin pump, for instance, because that's more convenient. It particularly harms them at the point in which they literally can't get their dose. Make no mistake, it isn't just, inflation, price go up bad. There's a principled push here, wherein the rise of the media, wherein they portray these things to be fine, allow young people who see this shit on TikTok in the media, the mindset that I need it, I should use it, and it's fine to do so. Of which, all of that is not true, because it comes at the expense of you being mean to society and other people who otherwise need it more than you, because that's the reason in which it's actually being used for. So, TLDR, absent side effects that top half talked about, it wrecks your disposition to health and ultimately harms the most vulnerable. We are very proud to stand on side opposite government. Yeah, prop.